The movie begins with a gloomy scene. It's a foggy, cold morning with a very bleak sunrise. Despite the cold, an elderly man visits a grave and sobs uncontrollably. He appears to be very old and frail. The man's name is Geppetto and he works as a carpenter at the church, making wooden statues of the Lord Almighty. He also creates a variety of wooden objects. Geppetto was always incredible at his skill. He once fashioned a pair of wooden shoes for his beloved son, Carlo. Needless to say, they were stunning, and Carlo was beyond excited to be able to wear those shoes. Carlo was only 10 years old at the time, and when he passed away, it seemed as though he had taken the old man's life with him. Carlo was a very sweet young boy. He was a cute and jolly lad who swung around, played, and loved his father so much that he always obeyed him. The two never wanted anything else. They were just happy together, father and son. All they ever needed was each other's company. When Carlo went to bed every night, Geppetto told him a story. He used to tell Carlo that if he lied, his nose would grow and grow. Carlo, in turn, loved this story. Carlo loved to be around his father and enjoyed his time with Geppetto. He used to accompany his father to church and aided him in his work. But one tragic day, when playing outside, Carlo noticed some fighter planes. He had no idea what was going on in the world. Out of excitement, he showed the planes to Geppetto, who knew that it wasn't a good sign. They were both in church on that terrible day, as Carlo had wanted to assist his father in his work. This was the Second World War in Italy, and tension was everywhere. While looking at the planes, they felt the church shake. Just then, Carlo asked his father what was going on. Because of the danger, the two immediately emerged from the church. Geppetto was terrified and took Carlo with him, but Carlo had forgotten his pine cone inside the church. Despite his father's warnings, he went inside to retrieve it. That's when Carlo was attacked. Geppetto realized he wanted to go in, but it was too late. He was unable to save his son. Apparently, the planes in the sky were returning to base and had simply let go of their bombs to lighten their ballast. It is later revealed that Geppetto's small town was not even a target. The bombardment turned out to be an unintentional aerial strike by the Austro-Hungarian forces in Italy. But even though the strike wasn't meant to hurt anyone, it has stolen everything from Geppetto. Geppetto had tragically lost his son during the air strike. Because of this, he's always miserable and misses his son a lot. He always remains close to Carlo's grave and sits there while reminiscing the moments he spent with Carlo. As Geppetto loved Carlo a lot, his death completely shattered the old carpenter. Geppetto paid respects to his late son by planting a pine cone near his grave. He then spent his entire life taking care of the pine cone, as the cone represents Carlo to him. The carpenter never left his son's grave alone ever again. He went on to spend the next 20 years mourning Carlo's death. Because of this, Geppetto didn't work much and consumed even less food. The crucifix that he was working on in the church also remained unfinished. Years have passed since then, and the whole world seems to have moved on, but not Geppetto. Even the pine cone has grown into a large tree. Despite such a long time, Geppetto always sits under the pine tree while eating, because he likes to think that he's sharing his meal with his little baby boy. A small cricket resides inside the pine tree. He is a writer by the name of Sebastian. Sebastian watches Geppetto every day and jots down all the moments he has witnessed. One day, as he's writing about himself, Sebastian starts to hear Geppetto's voice. He sympathizes with the poor, old carpenter who seems to be missing his son a lot. Sebastian feels terrible for Geppetto. That's when Sebastian notices some light-emitting eyeballs. He says that those are the old spirits of the forest who rarely ever involve themselves with humans. As he's wondering about the spirits, an enraged Geppetto starts demanding the return of his son. He then cuts down the pine tree in a drunken rage in order to make a wooden puppet. But as he's completely wasted, he isn't able to finish his work in time. While Geppetto carves different structures out of the tree, a very disgruntled Sebastian, who's still inside the log, asks him to stop. However, Geppetto doesn't listen to Sebastian. Instead, he continues to drink and split the tree into pieces. Sebastian somehow saves himself. Later on, Geppetto exclaims that he will finish it tomorrow and unconsciously falls down a ladder. But as he's too drunk, he doesn't even try to get up and sleeps there. Sebastian finally comes out of hiding and starts to insist that the puppet is still his home. He shoos away all the forest spirits surrounding the puppet and tries to go back inside. Just then, the forest spirit appears before him in all its glory. She calls herself the Blue Wood Spirit. Sebastian is shocked and scared, so he says nothing. He simply watches as the spirit brings the puppet to life, but Sebastian begins to protest, saying that it's his home. That's when the spirit says that she felt bad about Geppetto's condition and wants to give him a son once again. Sebastian understands that but still doesn't agree. So, in order to satisfy him, the Blue Wood Spirit tells him that he needs to take good care of the puppet and make him a good boy. If he's successful in doing so, then the spirit will give him a blessing that will fulfill his one true desire. After that, Sebastian agrees and the spirit gives birth to Geppetto's son. She then gives the puppet a name called Pinocchio. Sebastian watches it all unfold happily while intending to use the blessing to become famous. The next morning, Geppetto discovers that Pinocchio is alive but refuses to accept him as a son. Instead, he's offended when Pinocchio refers to him as Papa because he longs for his own son, Carlo. But eventually, after some time, the two start getting closer. In order to hide him from the world, Geppetto locks Pinocchio in a closet while he goes to church. But Pinocchio doesn't listen to his papa and follows him, causing all the villagers to see him. Sebastian tries his best to get the situation under control but fails miserably. All the villagers get really shocked and are afraid of Pinocchio. They claim that the puppet is actually the devil who's very dangerous, but Geppetto ignores them all. The very next day, a church father and an army officer arrive at Geppetto's house and question him about whether his creation will harm the community. In turn, Geppetto replies that Pinocchio is completely harmless. Because of this, the officer advises him to send Pinocchio to school. That way, he could become a good boy. After that, all of them celebrate and drink hot chocolate. As they're all drinking hot chocolate, Pinocchio starts to insist that he wants the same thing as Candlewick, the army officer's son. But unfortunately, he ends up burning his legs because of Candlewick's provocation. Geppetto somehow handles the situation, and later, they all go to sleep. But at night, Pinocchio wakes up to see Sebastian in front of him. He then takes this opportunity to ask Sebastian who Carlo actually was. Sebastian finally explains to him that Carlo was Geppetto's son, and that Geppetto has never been able to get over the loss of his young boy. The next day, Geppetto sends Pinocchio to school, but the puppet is noticed by a cunning man and his performing monkey. The man turns out to be an aristocratic-turned-showman called Count Volp, while his monkey is called Spazzatura. After devising a wicked plan, Count Volp manages to convince Pinocchio to join his circus. The Count even gets Pinocchio to sign a contract for safety. Pinocchio finally agrees and goes with Count Volp. Pinocchio starts working with the circus instead of going to school. After Geppetto arrives to take Pinocchio home, he and Volp get into a tug-of-war that results in Pinocchio being thrown to the road, where he is hit by a car. Due to this, Pinocchio is sent to the afterlife where he meets the Black Rabbits. He is then sent through the doors to meet Death, the sister of the Wood Spirit. There, she explains to Pinocchio that he is immortal, and that he will return to the mortal realm once an hourglass has emptied, cautioning that the time he spends in the afterlife will increase each time he returns. Pinocchio understands this and returns to the mortal realm. After returning, he tells his papa that he wishes to join the army for the war, but Geppetto stops him. He claims that war is bad and that joining the military means death. Geppetto is just scared of losing Pinocchio the same way he lost Carlo. He blames it all on war and doesn't wish to be separated from Pinocchio as he loves him a lot. After Pinocchio continues insisting, Geppetto gets irritated and yells at Pinocchio while saying that he is merely a burden on him. Pinocchio gets really depressed and sad after hearing that, so, at night, he decides to go to training. Before leaving, he tells Sebastian that he's going to war in order to help his father. Sebastian is horrified to hear that and tries to stop him, but Pinocchio just captures him inside a glass. He then writes his father a farewell letter. After that, Pinocchio locks the door and walks away. As he's walking, Pinocchio runs into Count Volp, who convinces the puppet to join him. After thinking for a while, Pinocchio decides to join Volp's circus, both to help Geppetto and to avoid being included in the Italian royal army, as it's quite dangerous. But Volp, on the other hand, keeps all of Pinocchio's money to himself. Spazzatura soon notices this and tells Pinocchio about it through his puppet. However, when Volp discovers Spazzatura's betrayal, he attempts to beat up the monkey until Pinocchio defends him. Meanwhile, Geppetto finds out that Pinocchio has run away. As he was never happy with Pinocchio's decision to go to war, both he and Sebastian start looking for the wooden boy. Unfortunately, the two get swallowed by a giant sea monster while on their search for Pinocchio at sea. Meanwhile, Pinocchio starts singing and dancing in the circus. He does really well, but is unfortunately executed after singing a disparaging parody of a patriotic song to Benito Mussolini during one of his performances. As he doesn't want to be in the circus anymore, but rather join the army just like Candlewick and all his other friends, Pinocchio gets resurrected in front of the army officer, Podesta, who seems to be traveling to a training camp. There, he meets Candlewick once again, who happens to be very afraid of disappointing his father and being seen as weak. After finding this out, Pinocchio befriends him and motivates him to do better. As time passes, the war escalates and Candlewick ends up defying his father on Pinocchio's advice. Soon, the training camp is bombed by an enemy aircraft, killing Podesta. Pinocchio is then thrown into the air by the bomb's explosion. He somehow escapes and is apprehended by Volp, who attempts to burn him in retaliation. That's when the evil count is stopped by a reformed Spazzatura. During the fight, they all get thrown off a cliff, and Volp dies, but Pinocchio manages to save himself and Spazzatura. Unfortunately, the two get swallowed by a massive sea monster and join Geppetto and Sebastian in its stomach. In order to escape, Pinocchio starts lying, which causes his nose to grow, creating a bridge leading out of the monster's blowhole. As they flee, the monster tries to eat them again, prompting Pinocchio to sacrifice himself by detonating a naval mine that the monster is about to swallow. Pinocchio passes away once again, and there, he meets death. He then requests to be sent back early so that he can save Geppetto from drowning, even though he knows at this time, he won't get resurrected back. Pinocchio gets resurrected and saves Geppetto but ends up losing his life in the process. Geppetto survives but is devastated to learn that his son is gone once again. Even Sebastian is wrecked to know that Pinocchio is gone, so he uses his blessing from the spirit to bring Pinocchio back to life, which the wood spirit happily grants. Fortunately, Pinocchio comes back to life, and he and all his friends return home to start a family. As time passes, Pinocchio outlives all of his loved ones. Geppetto passes away of old age, and Sebastian also passes away when his time comes. To honor him, Pinocchio places Sebastian in a matchbox and stores the box inside him forever. Spazzatura passes away too, and Pinocchio lays flowers on his grave every now and then. Pinocchio eventually decides to travel alone to unknown lands in search of new adventures. The movie finally ends with Sebastian singing his song for the Black Rabbits in the afterlife.